So we have been factoring for what probably seems like a lifetime to you guys. And just as a little reminder, if we were going to solve this particular quadratic equation, knowing what we know so far, and again, we know that we need to use the method we're getting ready to use because it's quadratic. It's got that 2, it's a trinomial, it's got 3 terms, and a is greater than 1. And this is an equation set equal to 0, which means we're looking for the zeros of the equation. And unfortunately, we don't have a greatest common factor to factor out of these. So because of all of that, we're going to have to use the AC method. So remember, step 1, you would have to multiply A times C and then figure out what you multiply to get that AC that you would add to get B. Then you would have to use those 2 numbers that you got in that step to split up the middle term so that you can factor by grouping. Then, of course, you got to do all that factoring by grouping until you end up with those 2 binomials right here at the end. But then, of course, we're still not finished because I've kind of ignored the fact that this is an equation up until now. But now that we've factored it, now we're going to have to solve for zeros. So we're going to quit ignoring that equal to 0. And then finally, we've got to solve the x plus 1 equal to 0 to get one solution. And then the 2x plus 3 equal to 0 so that we can get our second solution. So why did I take you down memory lane here for a moment? Well, this is a lot of work, right? Like, we had to do a lot of stuff to find the 2 solutions to this quadratic equation. So today, I am going to introduce you to a new strategy that I think you're gonna like that is a lot shorter than doing all of this to find your 2 solutions. And because it's useful for solving quadratic equations, it has a name that makes sense. So it is called the quadratic formula, and obviously it's good for solving quadratic equations. And it's just one formula that you need to memorize from here on out if you like, and it'll work for literally every single time you have to solve a quadratic equation. And that formula is x equals, because you're trying to figure out the value for x when you get done with this, negative b, or I really kind of prefer opposite b, is what I really prefer instead of saying negative b, although most people say negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is divided by 2a. Seems really complicated, but after you get a couple under your belt, you realize it's really not that bad. The hardest part is just memorizing the formula, and there's literally a gazillion videos out there in YouTube land to help you memorize this equation. So how exactly would the quadratic formula work with the problem that we just did by factoring? So I'm going to just kind of leave this x equals, I'm going to kind of ignore it for a second, and I'm just going to work on substituting the variables into this part of the formula. So you guys all know, because we've been doing this for a hot minute, that the coefficient in front of the x squared is the a, the coefficient in front of the x is the b, and that constant that is by itself is the c. So you're just going to take those individual 3 numbers and substitute it into the formula. So, for example, opposite of b, well, in this case, the b is 5, so I'm going to substitute that 5 in for b, plus or minus, and square root is still always just part of the formula. And then b squared, so again, we're going to square b. Well, that's going to be 5 squared, so I'm going to just put that in there right now. Minus 4. 4 is always part of the formula no matter what. It's the 4 is just always going to be part of it. Instead of 4 times a, we're going to substitute in the 2 value that we have for a, and instead of the letter c, we are going to substitute in there the 3 that we have, and all of this is over 2 times a. which of course is 2 times 2. You might notice that part of this equation should look fairly familiar to you, the opposite b over 2a. It actually has the vertex formula kind of built in there. So really, the only new thing you have to memorize about this formula is everything that's underneath the square root. And that actually has a special name we'll talk about later, not right now because I already want to, don't want to overload you too much. So the very first thing we need to do is address what all is underneath the square root symbol. Even though I don't want you to get confused, I don't want you to think that this is parentheses, the square root symbol does kind of act like parentheses and that all of that stuff underneath there kind of works all together. So I'm going to start there with kind of simplifying what's underneath there. And we follow regular order of operations like we always do. So order of operations, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You guys know that by now. So you know the exponent comes before you multiply. So that means that the very first thing we're going to do is that 5 squared. Obviously, 5 times 5 is 25. And then we're going to deal with that multiplication. So we're going to do 4 times 2 times 3. So that is going to be 24. And don't forget the minus that's part of the formula. So that's going to be a minus 24. And then if we simplify that just a little bit more, you'll see 25 minus 24 is just going to be a 1. So kind of take care of everything that's underneath the square root first. And I'm going to simplify that even more because remember what a square root means. It means what number times itself is going to give you that number. Well, obviously, the only thing that's going to give you 1 is 1 times 1. So the square root of 1 is 1. So I am going to bring down, like I've kind of cleared out all of the square root. So I'm going to bring the rest of the formula down. I still haven't done anything with this -5 yet. So it'll be -5. Ooh, that was an ugly 5. Sorry, guys. So -5. And then plus or minus 1. I'm going to explain what the deal is with that plus or minus 1 in just a second. So just hang with me. And then I'm going to go ahead and multiply this 2 times 2 together that are down there in the denominator. And obviously 2 times 2 is 4. So far, all I've done is I cleaned up, I took care of everything that was under the square root first, kind of simplified it all the way down until I got just a regular old number. And then I just brought the rest of the formula down. I brought that opposite b down, and then that 2 times a, and brought all of it down. So now I'm going to explain what's the deal with the plus or minus. Well, you guys know that frequently, now not all the time, but a great deal of the time, you have 2 solutions when you are solving a quadratic equation because it frequently represents the places that the parabola hits the x-axis, and frequently there are 2 of those. So we're actually going to have to solve this formula now 2 different ways. We're going to have to do a positive version of the formula. So it'll be -5 plus 1 divided by 4. And then we also need to evaluate it for -5 minus 1 divided by 4. So that plus minus means that you're going to need to solve it 2 different ways. You've got to add 1 and subtract 1 in order to get 2 different solutions. So let's see where we end up with that. So in the first one, if I do -5 plus 1, that's going to give me -4. And then -4 divided by 4 is -1. And if I do -5 minus 1, that gives me -6 over 4, which simplifies to a -3 over 2. So we got the same 2 solutions that we did by using the AC method. This way is, I know at first when you're learning how to do it, it seems like, oh my gosh, that doesn't look any shorter to me. But it really is once you get used to it. It's actually a lot fewer steps than using the AC method. And the hardest part, like I mentioned, is just getting the formula down. So with that being said, attached to this assignment for today are 2 videos to help you memorize quadratic formula. You're welcome, because they are literally about to make your day.